Let me walk you through what was actually happening, while you stood in your kitchen this morning, disoriented, wondering why something so simple as making a decision felt suddenly impossible. Confusion is one of the oldest weapons there is. It doesn't announce itself the way fear does. It doesn't come in loud, obvious, easy to name, and therefore easy to resist. It slips in quietly, disguised as ordinary tiredness, as a rough morning. As one of those days everybody has sometimes. And because it disguises itself so well, most people never recognize it for what it is. They just accept the fog as part of life, never questioning why it arrived exactly when it did, exactly at the moment it could do the most damage. I want you to think back to what you were standing at the edge of, right before this morning's fog rolled in. There was something you were close to. A decision you'd finally found peace about. A step forward you'd been building the courage to take. A conversation you were finally ready to have. A boundary you'd decided, after everything, you were finally going to hold. Whatever it was for you specifically, you were standing right at the threshold of something that mattered, something that would have moved you forward, in a way that threatened whatever has been trying to keep you stuck. That's exactly why the fog came, when it did. Confusion doesn't attack people standing still. It attacks people, right before they move. It doesn't waste its energy on someone who's already given up, already resigned to staying exactly where they are. It saves its full weight for the moment right before breakthrough, because that's the moment where doubt does the most damage, where one foggy, disoriented morning can convince a person to quietly shelve the very thing that was about to change everything. You almost talked yourself out of something today. I watched you do it. I watched the moment where the fog whispered that maybe you were wrong about all of it, maybe you'd misread the whole situation, maybe it would just be easier to go back to how things were, before you started hoping for something different. I watched you almost believe it. But something in you didn't fully surrender to the fog, even when it felt thickest. Some small, stubborn thread of clarity stayed lit underneath all that confusion, refusing to go completely dark. That thread was me. I did not let the fog win completely, even in the moments it felt like it might. I want you to understand something about how I move in moments like this. I don't always remove the attack before it reaches you. Sometimes I let you walk through it, fully, because walking through it and coming out the other side still standing teaches you something that avoiding it entirely never could. But I never let it finish what it came to do. I was in that fog with you this morning, holding the door open just enough that you could still find your way back to clarity, even while everything around you felt disoriented. I also want you to notice the timing of this attack a little more closely, because the precision of it is not something I want you to overlook. It didn't arrive on a random Tuesday for no reason. It arrived at the exact moment your resolve was strongest, the exact morning after you'd finally made peace with a decision that had been costing you sleep for weeks. That is not coincidence. Attacks like this one are almost always most intense right before a breakthrough, not because breakthrough attracts random misfortune, but because whatever benefits from you staying stuck can sense, in whatever limited way it senses things, that its window is closing. Think about the specific shape your doubts took this morning. They probably didn't feel like new doubts, freshly invented for the occasion. They probably felt like old, familiar fears resurfacing, dressed in slightly different clothes, the same worries you thought you'd already worked through months ago, suddenly reappearing with fresh urgency. That recycling of old fears is a common tactic. It's easier to destabilize you with doubts you've already wrestled with before, than to invent something entirely new, because the old fears already have grooves worn into your mind, paths that are easier to fall back into, than to resist. I also want to speak to something specific about the way this attack tried to isolate you this morning, even before you'd spoken to another person all day. Confusion works best in isolation, in the space between waking up and actually engaging with the world. Where there's no one else's voice to interrupt the internal narrative it's trying to build. That's part of why mornings are such a common target. You're most alone with your own thoughts in those early hours, most vulnerable to a voice that isn't yours, pretending to be the only voice in the room. I want you to remember, the next time a morning starts this way, that you are never actually as alone in that room, as the fog wants you to feel. I am there in the silence just as much as I am there in the noise of a full day, and I don't need you to speak first, for me to already be present. There's another layer to this worth naming directly. The confusion this morning wasn't just trying to make you give up on the specific thing you were closest to. It was trying to establish a pattern, training you to associate hope itself with disappointment, so that the next time something good starts to feel possible, you flinch before you even fully let yourself believe it. That's the deeper strategy behind an attack like this one. It's not just about today. It's about making you gun-shy toward every future moment of hope, so that eventually you stop reaching for breakthrough altogether, simply to avoid the discomfort of hoping, and then getting disoriented right before it arrives. I refuse to let that pattern take root in you. I am naming it explicitly tonight, so you can recognize it, and refuse it the next time it tries to repeat itself. If you're ready to stop letting confusion decide what you believe about your own life, do something with me right now that matters more than a passive scroll past this message. Subscribe, as a way of stepping fully into a covenant where clarity, not confusion, gets the final word over your mind from this point forward. Here is what I need you to understand. And I need you to let it settle all the way down, instead of just passing through your mind the way information usually does. This was never a fair fight, because it was never actually a fight to begin with. The outcome was decided long before this morning's fog ever showed up at your door. You are not walking toward victory the way a person walks toward an uncertain finish line, hoping they'll cross it in time. You are walking in victory that has already been secured. The way a person walks through a house they already own, simply moving from room to room, discovering more of what already belongs to them. Say that to yourself again, slower this time, because it deserves to actually land instead of simply passing through. The outcome was decided before the fog arrived. Not after you fought hard enough. Not once you proved yourself worthy of it. Before. That timing matters more than you might realize right now. Because it means nothing you did or didn't do this morning ever put the outcome at risk in the first place. I know that's hard to feel, this morning still lingering in your chest. Confusion has a way of making certainty feel like naivety, making faith feel like denial of how bad things actually are. I want to correct that lie directly. Believing that victory is already yours is not denial. It is the most accurate assessment of your situation available, more accurate than the fog. More accurate than the doubt, more accurate than whatever those disoriented morning thoughts tried to convince you was true. In the next 72 hours, watch for the fog to lift in a way that surprises you with how sudden it feels. Not a slow, gradual clearing you have to work hard to notice, but a distinct moment where something that felt tangled and impossible to sort through this morning, suddenly makes complete sense. You'll find yourself thinking, almost out loud, why did that ever feel so confusing? And in that exact realization, you'll understand that the fog is fully behind you now, not just temporarily lifted. Before the sun rises tomorrow, I want you to pay attention to your sleep specifically. Something is going to shift in the depth of your rest tonight, that you haven't experienced in longer than you'd like to admit. The kind of sleep that isn't just unconscious hours passing, but actual restoration. The kind where you wake up and your mind feels like it's been wiped clean of static, that's been running in the background for longer than you realized. That restored clarity is not a coincidence. It's confirmation that what tried to attack you this morning has already lost its grip. I also want you to watch for a specific kind of boldness returning to you in the coming days, showing up in a moment you least expected. A conversation you've been avoiding suddenly feels possible to have. A decision that felt impossibly tangled suddenly feels simple. A step you'd convinced yourself you weren't ready for suddenly feels like exactly the right move at exactly the right time. That boldness is the direct result of the fog losing its hold, the confusion finally releasing what it was never allowed to keep permanently. If this is already resonating somewhere specific, if you already know exactly what this morning's confusion was trying to make you abandon, type 333 right now. Let that number be your declaration that you see the pattern clearly now, and you refuse to let fog decide what you believe about your own future, ever again. I want to say more about what victory already secured actually looks like in practice, because it's easy to let that phrase pass by as a nice sentiment, without understanding what it actually changes about how you live the rest of this week. It means you no longer need to win the argument against doubt, every single time it shows up. You simply need to remember that the argument was already settled before it started. When the fog tries to reopen a case that's already been decided, you don't need to relitigate it from scratch. You only need to point back to the verdict that's already been rendered, and refuse to entertain the appeal. I also want you to consider what it will feel like when you look back on this exact week, sometime further down the road, and recognize it as the turning point it actually was. Right now, standing this close to it, today probably still feels foggy around the edges, uncertain in ways that make it hard to fully trust what I'm telling you. That's normal. Clarity about a turning point rarely arrives in the middle of it. It usually arrives afterward, once you have enough distance to see the whole shape of what happened. I'm asking you to trust the shape now, even before you can see all of it clearly, because I already see the whole thing, from where I stand. There is also something I want you to notice about your own resilience over these next several days, evidence that will confirm everything I'm telling you if you pay attention closely enough. You will find yourself recovering from small frustrations faster than usual, letting things go that would have spiraled into a full afternoon of discouragement, even a week ago. That faster recovery is not you simply having a good week by chance. It's the direct evidence of victory already working itself out in your daily life, small proof stacking up, before the larger proof arrives. I want to give you one more thing to watch for, something quieter than the rest, but no less significant. Pay attention to a moment, likely within the next few days, where you catch yourself encouraging someone else through nearly the exact same fog you walked through this morning. Almost as if the words are arriving in your mouth before you fully thought them through. That is not coincidence either. It's confirmation that what you survived this morning is already being converted into something useful, something that will serve someone else's breakthrough the same way it's serving yours. I rarely let you walk through something this specific, without eventually using it to strengthen someone standing exactly where you stood today. There's one more piece of this timeline worth naming clearly. Somewhere in the coming week, expect a moment of unexpected confirmation, something external, tangible, that lines up so precisely with what I'm telling you tonight, that it would be difficult to dismiss as chance. It might come as a message from someone unaware of what you walked through this morning, using language that echoes almost exactly what you needed to hear. It might come as a piece of news that directly validates the decision the fog tried to make you abandon. Whatever shape it takes, when it arrives, let it settle the question fully. Don't let the old habit of doubting good news talk you out of receiving confirmation simply because it feels almost too well timed to be real. I want to explain something to you that most people never fully understand, because understanding it will change how you respond every single time this happens again. And it will happen again, because this world does not run out of attempts to make you forget what's true. Your mind is the first target in almost every attack, because your mind is where every other decision gets made. If confusion can take hold there first, it doesn't need to fight you anywhere else. It doesn't need to attack your health, your finances, your relationships directly, because if it can convince your mind that giving up is reasonable, you'll dismantle those things yourself, slowly, one discouraged decision at a time, without any outside force needing to lift a finger. This is why the fog this morning felt so specifically aimed at the exact thing you were closest to accomplishing. It wasn't random static. It was precision, targeted at the one area of your life where breakthrough was closest, because breakthrough there threatens everything the fog was trying to protect. I need you to understand the difference between ordinary tiredness and this kind of targeted confusion, because learning to tell them apart will protect you the next time it happens. Ordinary tiredness feels heavy but explainable. You can usually trace it back to a late night, a stressful week, a body that simply needs rest. Targeted confusion feels different. It feels disproportionate to what's actually happening in your circumstances. It arrives suddenly, often right after a moment of clarity or hope, and it specifically clouds the exact area of your life where you were closest to moving forward. When you notice that pattern, that disproportionate, precisely aimed fog, you'll know to name it for what it is instead of accepting it as just another rough morning. I also want to address the shame that sometimes follows a morning like this one, the quiet embarrassment of almost giving up on something you know matters. The fear that if you almost gave in this time, you might actually give in the next time the fog comes back. I want to release you from that shame completely. Almost giving up is not the same as actually giving up. The fact that you're here right now, listening to this, still holding on to whatever it was the fog tried to take from you, proves that something in you refused to fully surrender, even in the thickest part of the confusion. I want to correct one more thing. Gently but honestly. You've started to believe that these foggy mornings mean something is fundamentally wrong with you, that other people don't struggle with this kind of disorientation, that you're somehow more susceptible to confusion than everyone else around you. That belief is not true, and I need you to release it tonight. Everyone who has ever stood close to something meaningful has faced this same kind of resistance in one form or another. The fog is not evidence of your weakness. It's evidence of how close you actually are to something worth fighting for. There's a name that surfaced in your mind while I described that specific kind of shame, the quiet fear of almost giving up. Maybe it's someone you know who's been unusually foggy lately, unusually discouraged in ways they haven't fully explained to anyone. Send this to them. You'll know exactly why their face appeared the moment I mentioned it. And they may need to hear tonight exactly what this fog tried to take from you. I want to give you something practical to hold on to the next time this fog arrives, because knowledge without a tool to act on it tends to fade the moment life gets busy again. When you notice that specific disproportionate heaviness settling in, the kind that feels bigger than the actual circumstances of your day, I want you to say something out loud, even if it's just a whisper. Say, I recognize what this is, and it does not get to decide what I believe. That simple act of naming it out loud interrupts the pattern in a way that silent suffering through it never does. Confusion depends on staying unnamed, operating in the background without you consciously identifying what's happening. The moment you name it clearly, out loud, you take back a measure of authority over your own mind that the fog was counting on you never reclaiming. I also want to speak to the fatigue underneath all of this, because fog like this rarely arrives in isolation. It usually shows up during seasons where you're already running on less than you need, carrying more than feels sustainable, showing up for everyone else's needs while quietly neglecting your own. That underlying exhaustion doesn't cause the spiritual attack, but it does make you more vulnerable to it. The same way a body run down from lack of sleep catches every passing illness more easily than a well-rested one. I'm not just asking you to recognize the fog. I'm asking you to examine what's been depleting you long before this morning, because addressing that deeper depletion will make you less susceptible the next time something tries to take advantage of how tired you've become. I want to correct one more pattern before we move into the final movement. And this one might be the hardest to hear because it involves the way you talk to yourself in the aftermath of a foggy morning like this one. You have a habit of adding a second layer of suffering on top of the original attack, criticizing yourself for having struggled in the first place, as though a stronger version of you wouldn't have felt disoriented at all. That self-criticism is not humility, and it's not accountability. It's an additional wound, self-inflicted, stacked on top of an attack you didn't invite in the first place. I want you to release that habit tonight. Struggling against confusion is not evidence of weakness. It's evidence that you're standing close enough to something worth protecting that it required an attack at all. I want to close by showing you what life actually looks like once you stop letting foggy mornings dictate what you believe is possible for you. You will develop, over time, an almost instinctive ability to recognize the fog the moment it arrives, instead of hours or days into it. You'll feel that specific disproportionate heaviness settle in, and instead of accepting it as simply how today is going to be, you'll pause, you'll name it, you'll remember this exact conversation, and you'll refuse to let it make decisions on your behalf. That recognition alone will save you from countless mornings that would have otherwise cost you ground you'd worked hard to gain. You'll also notice something shift in how quickly you recover when the fog does show up, because it will show up again, not because I failed to protect you, but because this world will keep testing what it can still shake loose in you. The difference won't be whether the fog arrives. The difference will be how long you let it stay. How much ground you let it convince you to give up before you remember that the outcome was already decided in your favor long before the confusion ever showed up at your door. I want you to picture something specific before you close this tonight. Picture the exact thing you were closest to this morning, right before the fog arrived, the decision, the conversation, the step forward you'd finally found the courage to take. I want you to see yourself actually taking that step, clearly. Without hesitation, without the disoriented heaviness that tried to convince you it was impossible. That image is not wishful thinking. It is closer to your actual future than the fog ever was to being your truth. Victory does not mean the fog never comes again. Victory means you no longer mistake the fog for the final word on your situation. It means you've learned to hold your ground even while disoriented. Trusting that clarity is coming even in the moments you can't yet see it clearly. That is a different, deeper kind of strength than simply never being confused at all. Anyone can feel strong on a clear day. I am building something sturdier in you, the kind of strength that holds even when the day starts foggy, even when the confusion tries to convince you otherwise. I want to tell you about the specific shape your life takes on the other side of learning this lesson fully, because it's easy to hear all of this and still wonder what practical difference it actually makes going forward. You will still have difficult mornings. I'm not promising you an existence free of hard moments, because that would be a promise built on comfort rather than truth. What changes is the speed of your recovery. The shortness of the window between the fog arriving and you remembering who's already won this. Where it once took you days to shake off a discouraging morning, it will start taking hours. Where it once took hours, it will start taking minutes. That compression of recovery time is not something that happens by accident. It happens because you've practiced naming the fog instead of silently drowning in it. Because you've learned the difference between ordinary tiredness and targeted confusion, because you've built the muscle of remembering the verdict instead of relitigating the case every single time doubt shows back up at your door. I also want you to notice something about the people around you as this shift takes root. They will start noticing something different in you, even if they can't quite articulate what changed. A steadiness that wasn't there before. A way of moving through difficult mornings that doesn't rattle the same way it used to. Some of them will ask you what's different. You won't always have a tidy answer for them, and that's alright. Some transformations are easier to live than to explain. Let me also speak directly to the specific thing this morning's fog tried hardest to convince you to release, because I don't want to leave that thread unfinished. Whatever it was, whatever hope, whatever decision. Whatever fragile piece of forward motion you almost let slip through your fingers under the weight of that disorientation. I want you to pick it back up right now, tonight, deliberately, with both hands. Not because the fog has fully lifted yet, it might still be lingering in traces even now, but because you no longer have to wait for full clarity before you're allowed to hold on to what's true. You can hold the promise and the fog at the same time. One does not have to fully clear before you're permitted to trust the other. I want to leave you with a final image before you close your eyes tonight. Picture a battlefield, already still, already quiet, the fighting long since finished, and you standing in the middle of it, not as someone who has to still defend the ground, but as someone simply walking through territory that already belongs to you. That is the actual posture I'm inviting you into tonight. Not the posture of someone bracing for another round, but the posture of someone who already knows how this ends, walking calmly through whatever remains of this morning's fog with the quiet confidence of someone who has already seen the outcome. I know it will take more than one message to fully undo months, maybe years, of believing that every foggy morning is a threat you have to fight your way through alone. That's alright. I'm not asking you to arrive at complete, unshakable confidence tonight. I'm asking you to take one step toward it, to let this specific morning become the first example of a fog you recognized clearly instead of one that quietly won without you noticing. Every future morning like this one will be a little easier than the last, not because the attacks will grow weaker, but because your recognition of them will grow stronger, sharper, faster. Until eventually the fog barely has time to settle before you've already named it and returned to the clarity that was always underneath it, waiting for you. I saw everything you almost gave up on this morning. I saw the exact moment doubt tried to close its hand around something you'd only just begun to hope for again. And I am telling you clearly tonight, in a way I need you to actually believe instead of simply hearing, that thing you almost let go of this morning is still yours. It was never actually in danger, no matter how convincingly the fog tried to make it feel otherwise. I know it will take more than one message to fully undo months, maybe years, of believing that every foggy morning is a threat you have to fight your way through alone. That's alright. I'm not asking you to arrive at complete, unshakable confidence tonight. I'm asking you to take one step toward it. To let this specific morning become the first example of a fog you recognized clearly instead of one that quietly won without you noticing. Every future morning like this one will be a little easier than the last, not because the attacks will grow weaker, but because your recognition of them will grow stronger, sharper, faster, until eventually the fog barely has time to settle before you've already named it and returned to the clarity that was always underneath it, waiting for you. Sleep tonight with your fists unclenched. Let your mind rest without replaying the disorientation of this morning one more time. The fog already lost. It lost the moment it tried to take root in a mind that belongs to me, protected by a love that does not lose battles it has already decided the outcome of in advance. You are not fighting for victory tonight. You are simply walking into what was already secured for you before this morning's confusion ever had a chance to arrive. Wake up tomorrow and notice the difference. Notice how much lighter the air feels the moment your eyes open, how much easier the first decision of the day comes to you, how much less resistance you meet simply getting out of bed and beginning again. That lightness is not luck. It's the direct, tangible result of a battle that was already finished before it ever started, a victory that was never actually in question. No matter how convincingly this morning's fog tried to make it feel otherwise. You survived it. You are still here, still holding what mattered, still walking forward, still standing on ground that was never actually taken from you. That is not a small thing. That is everything, and it is enough.